And what I did, they weren't all on one map when I did them, but I identified focus areas, and actually, I can't remember the name of the person who identified the ones in the Damariscotta watershed. It was not me.
It was Mark Ward.
Mark Ward. So each of these red circles is a focus area. Okay, and there's altogether 27 of them, averaging in size 3,500 acres. And I was thinking at a landscape scale. Again, it wasn't like preserve by preserve or easement by easement, which is sort of the way we've been thinking until that time. And why? The idea was an ecological idea, to maintain functioning, connected ecosystems, to protect biodiversity over time. And as a conservation biologist in the state, and I've worked at the Nature Conservancy for quite a few years, we knew that we have to think big, and we have to connect big places if we want to, over time, maintain biodiversity. So the rationale for most of these focus areas is ecological, but not all. And what I'm going to do is we're going down the Sheepscot first, and we're going to look at 2 or 3 slides per focus area. It's going to be probably way too much information, but I just want you to be able to visualize what we're looking at, okay? And just the approach I use to identify each of these is I start out looking at aerial photos. This was back before Google, so I had these, go to Augusta, look at black and white 1966 aerial photos of each of these, and then I paddled every lake and stretch a river just to get a sense of development and wetlands and that kind of thing. And I looked at all the state data, if there were rare plants that had been documented or natural communities. I looked at soils data to see where prime farmland soils were, archaeological data to see if there were any significant Native American sites. So I put all that together, IF&W data on deer yards, wetlands, and drew the areas based on amalgamating that information. And since then, there's been some new data that's come out, that climate resiliency data that I use all the time, and also connected stream networks for trout, that kind of thing. There's a lot of great information in there. We have all the information we need, basically, to do this. And I'm going to give you one really geeky example here, okay? Sorry about this, but this is Chisholm Pond, which is up at the top of the watershed. And these are 2 of the maps that were prepared. There's a 3rd one that shows property boundaries. On this side, I was just looking at ecological features. And the red line is the focus area boundary. There's this pond here with this big wetland system around it. There's a whole bunch of the Sheepscot River that runs right through the middle of it. There's deer yards, which are these brown circles here. There's a whole bunch of those. And then lots of tributaries running into the Sheepscot. So the goal was to think like watershed of the pond, incorporate all of that. This brown area is a large roadless block. It has some trails and stuff, but no major roads through it, so it's an unfragmented block. And then to try to protect the corridor of the Sheepscot, and also the watershed of this pond, which feeds into it. And then I look at, okay, where would be a good potential corridor, places along roads, say, where there's not many houses, to another focus area. There's actually another one right abutting this. And then things like cultural features. This one actually doesn't have many. Has a put in for canoes here. All the roads. The soils are in brown, the state significant farmland soils. Wet soils are in green. So this is the kind of information we put together to come up with these areas. So this is just to give you an example. And these sets of maps Midcoast has, and for all of the focus areas. And the idea was to have wide buffers. You know, we have our shoreline zoning 75 feet, maybe 250 feet, but IF&W is saying it should be at least 500 feet. Nature Conservancy in some cases 1,000 feet. But if you really want to protect water quality, which is really important in the headwaters because that affects everything downstream, we need to be thinking bigger, but we have it flipped. We tend to have smaller corridors along the little streams and wider ones along the big ones where the water quality is already pretty well determined by what's happening upstream. So, you know, we think differently when if we're trying to think long-term protection. So we're going to start with the Sheepscot. We're going to start at the top, and we're going to go all the way down to the south end of Westport Island and Hockomock Bay. So the northern headwaters you've probably heard about, Whitten Hill area, and a lot of it's being managed as an ecological reserve without any timber harvesting, but it's, you know, it looks like a bunch of forest land with occasional wetlands like this Bob Brook here that the road's crossing. And it includes about 4 miles of the river, the Sheepscot, that is all pristine along it. And it's got lots of different forest types, and it also is the beginning of an extensive trail system that goes over Fry Mountain and all the way to Belfast now. So recreationally, it's become an important area. Since I did work in Whitten Hill on the ground years ago, but this is a Sheepscot, how it starts, way up there, really pretty small stream. And these streams are really important for trout, for instance. In a trout, one single fish might use as much as 60 miles of habitat over the course of summer, trying to find cool water, moving from a place might dry out, so it moves to another stream. So this connectivity is really important. And this particular area has a whole lot of different forest types, like northern hardwood forest, really beautiful examples of northern hardwood forest, a lot of older trees. Hemlock forest on the upper right, and cedar swamps down below. So there's just a lot of different forest types, which is why we're recommending managing some of that as reserved land where you're not actually cutting it, because we don't have much older forests in Maine. Right now it's about 3% of the state is older than 100 years for forests. It's all been cut every 75 years or so. So we're missing whole pieces of the ecosystem. So next to this is the Chisholm Pond, another roadless area, one of the largest roadless blocks. It has this really pretty pond with peatland systems and streams coming out of it. Only one house you can see on it. And it includes about 7.5 miles of the Sheepscot. This is the outlet of the pond. So it's a big chunk, again, of that headwater system that's pretty important to protect. And there's a lot of red maple swamp around it, which are, a lot of people don't like them. They're usually loaded with poison ivy naturally, but they're a really important system, again, just for collecting water, and often there's a ton of vernal pools in these. And next to this, the color is weird, I don't know what's going on anyway, is a place called, we call it 4 Ponds. I came up with the names, but there's 4 ponds, and 2 of them have no development whatsoever. And the entire watershed is included in the focus area of the middle tube. And it's just a beautiful spot, with, again, lots of little headwater streams that feed into the Sheepscot River. Incredibly undeveloped.
Janet, what's that road? Do you know what road that is? Is that like that?
I don't. It's not a major road, but I do not remember what road. It's the one that goes by Chisholm. Actually, Chisholm would be like down there. So I think it turns to dirt where that intersection is.
So Janet, what town are we in now?
I can flip back and see.
Palermo.
Yeah, I think it would be Palermo. That's right. These are feeding in from Palermo. And here's one of the ponds, Foster. Nothing on it. I confess I trespass a lot. It's a great pond though. Area fishing hole. But nothing, no development whatsoever on it. And you have to bushwhack to get into it. Actually, this one had no road into it. It may now, but it didn't at the time. Branch Pond.
Janet, these are focus areas. Is any of that or all of that already protected?
Very little of that one. As a matter of fact, I think there was one piece that Midcoast doesn't own. I think there was a town forest or IPW site. A lot of these don't have, both land trusts before merging tended to focus on a handful of the focus areas, although a lot of our conservation work has occurred in them, but there hasn't been a revisit of the overall strategy, which is something I hope we can do down the road. This is a really interesting pond, a branch pond. It has a mill at the, I think this one has a mill at the outlet. I might be wrong about that. But it's the headwaters of the West Branch, which feeds into the Sheepscot, which is a big tributary, one of the major tributaries. And it has a whole bunch of kettles. You can barely see them here that are part of the watershed. And it's shallow, and it's called an outwash pond, which means there's a lot of, I think it may be over an aquifer. At the time we didn't have that data, I haven't revisited it. The water is incredibly clear. Outwash ponds tend to have a sandy bottom. There's quite a few rare species associated with, so it's just an interesting ecosystem. And here you can see some of those kettles.
What is this focus area called?
This one's called Branch Pond. That's the name of that, the big pond.
Yeah.
What's with the ring structure in Maine on the left?
This has a dam at the outlet, and it has a mill. It's a low head hydro. So some of it probably comes and goes with water levels, but I don't know, it's like a little raised boggy section of it that floods sometimes, is my guess. And all of these are on the order of 3,000 to 5,000 acres if you include as much of the watershed or undeveloped shoreline of these ponds as possible. Sheepscot Bog, I don't know if anyone's ever been in here, but it's a very cool place. It's about 4 miles of the shoreline is abutted by the wetland. God, I apologize for those colors.
It's pretty dramatic.
Yeah, it's projectors do this. But anyway, it's the largest peatland probably in the mid-coast. It's 1,300 acres, and it's a raised bog system, which is unusual. You get many more of them up north if you go up, say, towards Orono, Bangor. The Appleton Bog isn't as large as this, and it's mostly wooded. So to have an open pond system or bog system is pretty unusual. There's Atlantic salmon at the outlet of this one, which is actually down here. I think it comes in as a tributary and goes that way. So Atlantic salmon is spawning habitat. That doesn't mean it's necessarily there, but there's been a lot of habitat mapped in Sheepscot. And there's all kinds of wetlands, the mosaic of wetland types here. And it's a great little paddle. You can paddle into this really pretty kettle, which is in the distance here. You can see this pond. It's one of the biggest kettlehole ponds, like what's at Hidden Valley, but quite a bit larger. And all the classic cotton, grass, pitcher plants, bog species that you can see. Turner Pond, now this is another headwater pond, and Turner Branch is one of the other big tributaries that comes into the Sheepscot. And again, it's a mostly undeveloped pond, almost 200 acres. The average depth is only 4 feet. So in dry years, it turns more into a wet meadow, wetland, lots of different wetland species there. And there's this 800-acre wetland complex that it's a part of called Kelly Brook. So it's one of the larger wetland systems in the watershed. Again, really important to feeding or influencing water quality downstream. And there's a lot of significant wading bird habitat and that kind of thing. And here you can see the shoreline's very varied. There's some places with rock outcrops. A lot of it's very low. Quite pretty. And Turner Branch is a pretty good sized tributary coming in. And then where we are right now. As a matter of fact, I think we might be on here. This was pre-Sheepscot General, though. I used to live right nearby. But the Whitefield Farm Belt, this is a focus area that was based on land use, and it is definitely the highest concentration of farmland. About 60% of the focus area is prime farmland soil. I don't know how many farms there are now, probably more than there were when this was taken because of the Amish community moving in. And the Sheepscot's got quite a few miles of Sheepscot. I don't know how many. And if you've ever paddled the Sheepscot, you've gone down this stretch.
So how much of the river's nutrient loading comes from the farm belt?
Probably a fair bit. I don't know who's studying that. But, if you look, there's not much of a buffer along lots of it, which is the kind of thing that's good to do. But that's a good question. It depends on the practices being followed. And Kings Mills, the other side, there's also a lot of farms on the other side as well, not just along Townhouse Road where we are now. And again, this is also an important spawning rearing habitat for salmon. If you've been down at head tide, you've seen the place where they're actually monitoring salmon populations. And this is the view you'd see if it wasn't covered with snow when you drove here today. And then there's Benbrook. Benbrook has the largest unfragmented block in the watershed. It's almost 9,000 acres. And there's dirt roads into it and logging roads, but there's no major paved roads. And it includes a couple of very undeveloped ponds like this one, Weary Pond, and another pretty good-sized tributary into the Sheepscot, and mostly wooded. And there's Weary Pond. And there's about 8 miles of frontage on Bend Brook. And another pond that feeds in is Little Dyer Pond, which has a lot of really nice wetland around it. And both are quite remote.
Nature Center is a whole right-hand shore.
Right. The Hidden Valley Nature Center is in this neck of the woods. And about 30% of this focus area, which was, I think, 8,000 or 9,000 acres plus, is wetland, wet soils. A lot of it forested wetland. And that's the outlet of that pond, or inlet rather. This is a blurry picture, but Deer Meadow and Horn Ponds is a little bit to the east of that. Again, there's some more undeveloped ponds. and about 5.5 miles on Deer Meadow Brook, another pretty good sized tributary. Undeveloped pond watersheds, both of those, there's no development on them, or at least there wasn't then. It's one of the ponds. This is another very shallow pond. And Musquash Pond, which I know Midcoast is in the process of trying to protect. Nature Conservancy owns land along here, but another really pretty place. Interesting forest. There's a black pond forest there. And it's a cool place. Lower Deer Meadow. Now this is one of the most nondescript of the focus areas. There's let's see, how many miles does this have? About 3.5 miles on Deer Meadow Brook, but it's really close to Lincoln Academy, to population centers, Damariscotta, Newcastle, and you've got this wild stream system and a lot of undeveloped forest land. There's a, I think, county road, a dirt road that cuts over the south end of it. So again, one of the last freshwater tributaries, but near 3 population centers, a lot of wetland that's considered significant at the state level. And this is the brook close up, and it's beaver country. Particular focus area, there's a couple here and in the Medomak that are considered significant at the state level. It's an ecological focus area at the state level, and the Marsh River, Lower Sheepscot is one of those. And this is another one of the streams that comes in, Dyer River, near Cowship Corner, if any of you have been through there. So it's definitely the most salt marsh of anywhere in the watershed, within the new service area, actually. And quite lovely. Most of the shoreline has no buffer, but very beautiful if you're in Sheepscot Village.
Jen,
Yeah.
the marshy area in your Kosher corner, did you see that salt?
Dyer Brook, the tide comes part way up. It
does, huh?
emerges, so it's mostly brackish actually.
Wow.
But once you get near the farm, it's fresh. I mean, I don't know where the tide line is. It's getting higher all the time.
Right.
And then Lily Pond, which when I did this work, this sort of is on the boundary between the Booth Bay Land Trust focus area, but it's the only pond in Edgecombe. It's an undeveloped pond, and the focus area actually goes to salt water. But you know, from a recreational standpoint and a wildlife standpoint, this is pretty important. And it has a fair bit, at least it did, it had quite a bit of mature forest, and when I use that term, I mean 100 years or older. Here's a shot of it on the ground. And the focus here actually goes to Parsons Creek, which is saltwater, and a place called Mill Pond, the old mill where that road crosses. Really beautiful spot to paddle around in. And then Hockomock Bay. Now, if you've never been here, I would recommend paddling here, although there's some really stiff currents in some of these passages I find on my little pack canoe. Like, whoa, going backwards. But there's miles and miles of fairly undeveloped frontage. And in the Sheepscot watershed, this is the least developed saltwater frontage. There's an island, there's 12 islands altogether. Most of them are undeveloped. They have a couple camps on some of them. And one of them is called Beale Island, that's owned by the Appalachian Mountain Club, and actually has cabin, or I think lean-tos and stuff, you can camp on it. And it also has the second highest concentration of rare species in the watershed. I think the Marsh River was first. So it's significant from that point of view.
Is that Wiscasset in the?
Yeah, that's Wisconsin. So this is basically the south end of Westport Island, if you think, or where if you were to jump off Westport, you'd start hitting these islands. And here's another couple views of it. And again, the islands are beautiful, very intertidal. We've got things like pitch pine growing on some, and oak and spruce. It's kind of an interesting mix of north and south. And there's also a fen really close to one of these, which is in the oddest place for one, called Anderson Bog. So there's just a lot going on in this one focus area. Okay, so that's the Sheepscot. Now we're going to go over to the Damariscotta, the headwaters of Damariscotta Lake, which are in this area. And I did not work on this, so I don't have any aerial photos. I just have a handful of photos I got from Midcoast Conservancy, but it'll give you a sense of what it looks like. And these focus areas center around the major tributaries to the Damariscotta River, and also the last relatively undeveloped parts of the Damariscotta Lake shoreline. So just to give you a sense, West Branch is one of the three major tributaries, some pretty little ledge drops. And this is Davis Preserve. Cook's Pond is another little pond to the east of Damariscotta Lake that's mostly undeveloped and has a lot of large wetlands. There's a lot of large wetlands around these headwater streams. So again, the idea of if you're interested in protecting water quality in Damariscotta Lake, you should be looking at these headwater streams and wetlands. This is coming out of Cook's Pond.
I'm gonna note those are all now, this is land that just recently protected.
That's great.
These photos are from, so you take heart in that.
And Deep Cove, I've been skating up a storm on Damariscotta Lake this year, and there's this beautiful cove that you can go in that has only one house on it near the shore that you can see, and it goes in like close to a mile. So there's two places here in Western Narrows. There's two peninsulas that are relatively undeveloped on the Damariscotta Lake. The rest of it's pretty much camps. And this is one of them, so it's a really pretty spot. And there's some older hemlock forest. I haven't been on the ground here, but
Are either of those undeveloped ones protected?
there is some protected land from here going up to, is it Academy Road Hill? I can't remember, and I don't know about the Narrows.
You have some easements, like, family easements on that, you know, one little parcel there.
Yeah, so I'd say not a lot, but, and there's gotta be a lot of pressure to develop these. There's gotta be, like, you know, in terms of water quality, you're on a lake that has a lot of development. Like, it would help to not develop this, but I'd see it more almost recreational value too, or just scenic value to be able to see some of the lake that.
It's a blue nursery area, and it's also a very popular, sort of secret place that people love to go swimming.
Secret place that everybody loves to go
Everybody
to.
loves that.
Yeah,
Now
there's
you
little
all know.
beach at the head, yeah.
Yes.
Well, because there aren't very many other than Damariscotta Lake State Park.
But there is,
And
we do have easements on both those points that come in.
Okay, now we're gonna shift, sorry, it's really short shrift to the Damariscotta, but that's all I got. So the Damariscotta, the Medomak Valley, so this starts up again at Liberty, Searsmont, Appleton here. So we're gonna start up here and go down, explore the shore and head out into Muscongas Bay for a little bit. And I think one of the fundamental differences geographically is the lower half of this is a big estuary. These are the largest clam flats in the state, 5,000 acres of clam flats. The economy of the southern half of this is so centered around the bay. And, you know, I feel like here, there's definitely, Sheepscot estuary is important, but this defines the region. So it's really a new thing, I think, for Midcoast to be thinking sort of along those lines. Okay, so it starts way up in Liberty Montville with Pettonville Stream, which is one of two major tributaries coming in. And this is another state significant wetland. It's huge. It's got a lot of different bird species and insects and stuff that are considered rare. And this is Appleton Ridge. If any of you have driven up over the hill, one side drains into the St. George, it's the divide between the Medomak and the St. George, and some of the protected land along the Pettongill comes up over this ridge. So we've worked together, or we in the past worked with Georges Valley. And here it is again, you can see Appleton Ridge at the top, those cleared fields, and Pettongill. It's quite a big wetland. I can't remember how many hundreds of acres. And then we come into what we call the Upper Medomak focus area, and the Medomak River is just like Waldeboro, you know, it's like a well-kept secret. Nobody even knows it's there, which is true for the Medomak River. It just meanders its way for miles. There's no development on it. It's not a very big river, but it's mostly forested along it, like this. It separates, for instance, the town of Washington and Union. It's the dividing line, but it's mostly undeveloped, that upper part. So that's why that's a focus area, just the forested land along it. That doesn't mean it's not, you know, actively managed for trees and stuff, but the river itself is very undeveloped. And then it runs into Medomak Pond, and right here, and there's lots of wetlands along Medomak Pond. It's a couple hundred acres. Big red maple swamp. It's the second biggest one in the whole service area, I guess. And we have a pretty good size, there's a big preserve called Riverbrook that's right near here. So that's sort of the southern boundary of it. And then Clary Hill, some of you have probably been up to, but this is the blueberry land that separates Union and Waldoboro, and it's the largest area of commercial blueberry land south of Washington County. It's about 400 acres of actively managed blueberry land. Some's organic, some's not. And this is sort of, again, the focus areas center on different things. This is another one that where land use is really a driving factor, but not just land use in this case. I mean, obviously it's actively managed, burned every other year, but it also includes the watershed of Soar Pond, which is almost completely undeveloped other than some fields, and has had trout, and now I think it's just stopped. And it's also, one of the reasons this was protected was because it's habitat for some federally and state endangered species like upland sandpiper, or threatened species, Vesper sparrow, eastern meadowlark, and people that like to hawk watch, this is known nationally as a place to go watch raptors in the fall. So it had a lot of different values plus recreation. So just as an example of the types of things that focus areas might include, this one is combining the watershed of a pond, the commercial blueberry land, and recreational value. And then there's a place called Reef Point, which is pretty close to town, and there's this old quarry pond here, blueberry land in the middle of it, but it's another large forested area that has a lot of frontage on the Medomak.
Where's the river in that, Janet?
The river would be on this side, but you can't see it in this photo.
Thanks.
And there's lots of, some good-sized streams that come in big wet meadows. And so again, just wetland systems and an unbroken forest, a large unbroken forest very close to town of Waldoboro. And then Waldoboro, I'm showing Waldoboro because this is where the divide between estuary and freshwater, right in the village. And again, the town, you know, I'd say culturally, Waldoboro is such an interesting place. I'm on the Waldo Theater Board. We keep trying to figure out how to describe Waldoboro. It's actually quite challenging. And there's so much pride in it, and a very working, people just work on the land still. It's very common. There's also a lot of poverty. But I show this one because starting right here is what we call Three Brooks Forest, which is, we can see part of it here. Here's the village, and this is Three Brooks Forest going this way. The largest tract of unbroken forest on this side of Route 1 between, I've said this before, between Camden and Kittery. So it's unusual to have big blocks of forest land on when you get out towards coastal peninsulas. So it's pretty important in terms of wildlife over the long term. And this is, you know, looks kind of nondescript, but it's just, there's bear there, there's moose there. I mean, it's got lynx, not lynx, bobcat. And it's got three brooks going through it that look kind of like this. They're not huge, but they all feed in directly into the Medomak estuary. And all of them have smelt on them. Some have alewives. And then when you get down below Waldoboro, the focus shifts to saltwater, tidal, and there's a couple of places that have very little development. One is called Long Cove, which is this, which is on the Friendship side of the river, or the east side of the river. And that's, I think, the smallest focus area, about 600 acres of undeveloped land around this cove. And we haven't done a whole lot here. I think there's one or two protected pieces.
Yeah, there's
easements, maybe, yeah. And this is looking at it from a canoe. But it's a really pretty spot. Clams, mussels. Is 7 miles of, I did a alewife project on that, and there were 47 beaver dams I had to haul my canoe over. It's this really slow drop, and all of it's undeveloped, except where it gets down to Route 220, crossing it in Friendship. And it goes through the largest red maple swamp in the both areas, which is, you can see here in the winter, the leaves have dropped. It goes for 600 acres, it's huge. And the river just meanders through it and over beaver dams. And that's the town of Friendship in the foreground here. And looking back at Waldoboro. And that starts in an undeveloped pond called Havener Pond, which has boggy habitat here, and it's a pretty, you know, one of many. I guess there's 12 undeveloped ponds in the Medomak side, and probably about, I'm guessing, at least 30 in the Sheepscot. I haven't added it up. And it ends, the Goose River ends in these waterfalls falling out into salt water. And then on the other side of the river is the other, probably one of the more important focus areas that the Medomak Land Trust is focused on. Again, there's a lot of undeveloped shoreline there on the eastern and western branches of Broad Bay. And a lot of conservation work has happened there. But again, the saltwater frontage is becoming so rare that has been a big focus. And there's areas of salt marsh and tidal wave bird habitat that are considered important. And this has a couple other things that are interesting. Here you can see it flaps out generally at low tide, or parts of it do. But it has a pond called Peter's Pond, or Rose Pond is another name, which is one of the deepest ponds for its size in the entire mid-coast area. And it has had trout, I don't know if it does, but it's kind of a local swimming hangout and undeveloped. And then there's this interesting bog system, right, smushed in between the peninsulas too, which is kind of, we've got classic spruce bog. We can see the ring raised in the middle. So it's a combination of values. So, when we were coming up with the focus areas, the idea was thinking, large unfragmented habitat lots, but also combining as many conservation values or land use values into one package as you could. So this one combines all of those things. And then the last focus area on this side is Louds Island, which is one that we constantly are hoping Maine Coast Heritage Trust will take on. But it's an 830-acre island that has very little development. There used to be a community called Loudsville right here. And there's a bunch of old houses on it. The last person moved out in the 60s. But the south end is protected. There's 100 acres on that side that's protected. This beach is used by the public a lot. It's an unusual type called the tombolo. It connects to Hog Island, if you know where that is down here. But recreationally, if that were ever off limits to people, it's becoming actually maybe too popular. But it's a beautiful place with wetlands in the back, and the forest is a lot of spruce. Some of it's a little bit older, but most of it, like island forest, came after sheep pasture, and is mostly the same age and fallen down. But anyway, there's a lot of undeveloped land, more on this island than any other large island in the bay.
Are there large parcels?
Yeah, they tend to be 100, but they're not cheap.
Yeah, sure.
So although, by any standard other than Maine, they would be considered cheap. There was development proposed on this end, and it didn't happen. I'm not sure what happened there, but yeah. So this one I view as very tentative. I think there's be a lot of value in protecting land here, but it takes a sort of an order of magnitude higher dollars than we usually think about. And here's some views from it. It's a beautiful shoreline. And this is looking at the south end of it from the Laverna Preserve. This is the island, Louds Island connects to what's called Bar Island there. And then we're just going to take it quickly out into Miscongas Bay. And a lot of these islands are protected federally in some cases. This is Wreck Island, which used to have a great blue heron rookery on it, one of the biggest ones in the coast. But I think a lot of the trees they were in have died, so they moved elsewhere. Franklin Island has a big eider colony on it. So the ones that have seabirds nesting on them, many of them have been protected. But just to give you a sense of what the new service area includes, Harbor Island here in Crane, and some of that's protected by National Audubon. And then Eastern Egg Rock, where the puffin colony is. This is sort of the outer end of where we think of Miscongas Bay going. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the conservation, the idea of a strategy, because I'm hoping now that we've merged, we can kind of revisit and say, what should our strategy be? We've each individually said we're going to focus here and here. But is that the right place, or should we be thinking about it differently, or thinking about our criteria differently? And again, if you want to protect what we have